I'll see you in the pub later. Alright. Okay. In half an hour, on two soap stars who quit for mainstream stardom but didn't quite make it beg their old bosses to be written back in. That's I'm Not Too Big for This No More in half an hour. But first, Dr. Macclevoid, the films. Tonight, Britain is a mess. Nothing works. Civilization has broken down. A diseased population has been conditioned to attack itself. Gangs roam the countryside, worshipping child molesters, and people run for their lives. In a lawless country where someone is as likely to slit your throat as look at you. And by an extraordinary coincidence, there's 28 years later, the Bone Temple, which explores these issues in allegorical form. Welcome to Macclevoid at the Movies. Middle chapters, huh? They're tricky. How do you make a really good one? Well, for a start, Disney, if you're listening, you plan the whole series. You write the movies in advance, so you know where you're going, how you're going to develop the characters, what you want to say. So they're not just sort of incoherent films bolted together by a brand, but actually three parts of the same story. Alex Garland fortunately understands this, and that's why part 2 of 28 years later follows on very smoothly and very well from part 1. It's, you might say, just a natural continuation, except, of course, that it isn't just a natural continuation, it's a temporary baton passing. Danny Boyle has stood back, and he's pushed to the front Nia DaCosta. Who's she? Well, she directed the Marvels. But on this evidence, she didn't really direct the Marvels. She sort of handled those placeholder live-action inserts between pre-vised animatic, action sequences, and she just did the odd human scene here and there. Why do I say that? Because 28 years later, The Bone Temple, is a movie that's been very conspicuously directed, and well, by a human. Not a zany human like Danny Boyle, who sort of brings a kind of auteur's energy and his own unique style and sensibility to the movie, which extends to his collaborations with those who do the soundtrack. None of that. Okay, there's no, stylized stuff with iPhones here. None of that business. This is a straightforward, sober, point-and-click exercise in which the emphasis is very much on character. And that's the second key component to developing a trilogy. An emphasis on character development. Leave us in a place that's far in advance, story-wise and character-wise, of where we were at the beginning of the second film. If you like Danny Boyle's movies, you're going to miss the flash. You're going to miss the performance behind the camera as well as in front of the camera. You come away from Danny Boyle movies not entirely satisfied most of the time, but with a lot of good memories. That sequence that really resonated with you, that moment of cinematic virtuosity that got your attention and kept your attention and lived long in the memory. You know, the sequence, for example, in 28 Years Later, where Spike and his dad walk out from the causeway onto the mainland, and Rudyard Kipling's Boots is on the soundtrack, and it's been sort of overlaid with a discordant beat from the Young Fathers who did the soundtrack. That intercut with footage from Olivier's Henry V, the alternate myth of England, the history of England, if you will. That sticks with you. It's a little bit of cinematic magic dust sprinkled over the audience. Now, I don't know Nia DaCosta. Nia DaCosta isn't a friend of mine. I don't know her. But what I can infer from this piece of work is she's not interested in Flash. Oh no. Not for her, any of this, hey, I'll make a movie in the editing suite. None of that. Luckily for her, she's interested in people. She's interested in the psychological disposition of characters. And very luckily for her, Alex Garland has written a terrific script. A really interesting script. One that takes the mythology of this story in some unusual directions. And if you have those strong foundations, and this is a segue into my next point, for those of you who've seen the film, you know what's coming. If you have those strong foundations, then there's a certain certainty about what comes next, a certain solidity. And that's what this movie has in spades, solidity. It's not a stylistic tour de force, but it is an extremely involving and compelling film with a genuinely bonkers climax. Now, what Danny Boyle would have done with it, it's hard to say, but there is that feeling in the back of one's mind that maybe, just maybe, it would have been a little more glib, a little more comedic, a little more flippant in Boyle's hands than in DaCosta's hands. And consequently, we can say, can't we, that DaCosta was the right woman for the job. She's proved her naysayers wrong, and she's put in a terrific movie which bridges Boyle's films perfectly, on the assumption that we get to see Boyle's third film, which I think we will. Now, why do I mention foundations and certainties? Perhaps because the movie pivots thematically on a conversation between Ralph Fiennes, Dr. Kelson, and Sir Jimmy Crystal, the cult leader that we met at the end of the first film, who was, of course, the little boy who was chased out of his home next, his rectory cottage at the beginning of the first film, and he saw his dad, overcome with zombies in the church, and picked up a lot of religious iconography as a result, and some twisted ideas about hero worship. We'll come back to him. So Jimmy asked Kelson, do you remember what it was like before the pandemic, before rage hit us? Something that we couldn't really relate to as anything more than a kind of science fiction fantasy trope in 2002, but lands a bit differently today, doesn't it, kids? Kelson says, I can't remember the substance of living that way, of having shops, of everything just being on hand, of life being simple in that respect, of having electricity and phones and computers. But what I do remember is the feeling that underpinned that society, that sense of security, that sense of certainty, the sense that the foundations were strong and that life would probably continue along such lines indefinitely. That's really fundamentally what the movie is about. What happens when those foundations are ripped away? What happens when those certainties end? What happens when a society becomes less content and more divided and more fearful and less interdependent? And when some very base instincts have been allowed to come to the fore and take over? What could the filmmakers be talking about in modern day Britain? I don't know, do you? But it's a poignant scene because it underpins where Garland's going with this. What he's saying is that in the absence of strong governance or a coherent communitarian ideology, or not perhaps religion, but some sort of moral instruction that the population can buy into, you lay the ground for the lunatics, for the demented, for people like Sir Jimmy Crystal and his gang, his fingers as he calls them, dishing out his own unique form of charity to the masses. It's a sandbox for snake oil salesmen, opportunists, frauds, lunatics, demagogues. Yes, that's what happens when you open the door and, you know, your rage-infected monkeys get into the population. Who are today's rage-infected monkeys? Well, I can think of a few names, but I won't risk offending you, the loyal viewers of this show, by naming your favourite politicians. So, that's fundamentally what the film is about. That's what Crystal represents, the end of civilization. A personality cult, demagoguery. And Kelson represents, if you like, the hope, that good old fashioned scientific inquiry and calm and a love for Duran Duran can save the day. His love of Duran Duran, by the way, almost screams that he's a moderate-minded, middle-of-the-road individual. By circumstance, yes, he's become a man who's built a bone temple and smears his skin in iodine and is forced to spend all of his day inside a sort of corrugated iron alcove. But needs must, right? The beautiful relationship of the film is between Kelson and Samson the Alpha, his test subject, the monster with a huge Cillian Murphy that he's trying to cure. That's the hope in the movie. Sir Jimmy Crystal's gang is the danger. Sir Jimmy Crystal's gang really is the threat. Not the rage-infected zombie barely feature. They're just background noise. Everybody watching this film understands that it's about how the cognizant and human population react to the pandemic that will determine the future of the country. Do you want to give in to madness and psychosis and lunacy? Or do you want to try and rebuild civilization in the old-fashioned sense? And that is the conflict that we find when Sir Jimmy meets Kelson. I won't say much more because even though this is an incredibly spoilerific review, I like to leave you a few little tidbits, a few scraps on the table to enjoy even when you actually do go and see the film. I was aware on a very visceral level of that danger as it got closer to Kelson in the movie. And you egg Kelson on because you understand that it's a race against time for him to try and find a cure for this thing before somebody like Sir Jimmy knocks on his door and threatens everything that he's trying to do. Now, before we move on to the future in the third film, again, a little note about Sir Jimmy Crystal and his gang here. In the first movie, I talked about how I couldn't understand why Jimmy Savile was the template for Sir Jimmy Crystal. Because the boy in question would have been about 8 years old when he was attacked. This is in 2002. Jimmy Savile's hardly a sort of prominent pop cultural figure at that point. It's the Teletubbies he's watching when the zombies come, not Jim will fix it. What in his life has cemented that point of reference? We don't find out here. There's no linking scene, there's no contextualising scene. We can understand the joke from Garland's point of view. It's very clear why he chose Jimmy Savile as sort of the embodiment of Satanism and the misattribution of charity, if you like, and the misunderstanding of charity. But why this kid? We don't find out. And there's very little chance we'll now ever find out, I'm afraid. But it bugged me. It annoyed me as the film progressed. I just wanted that one scene, that one little conversation that just made me understand how he knew about Jimmy Savile. Because if he had said, I used to see this guy Jimmy Savile on the TV, he's always running marathons for charity, he's always doing charitable things. And so in his head he associates Savile with a sort of benevolence which he has perverted, ironically, to a level that the real Jimmy Savile would have found, no doubt, quite arousing. Then I get it, but it didn't happen. If you drew a different inference from a different scene, do tell. So, the future then. Where does 28 days later: the Bone Temple leave us? Well, it leaves us with a modicum of hope. We're reintroduced to Cillian Murphy's character from the first film, who is the kind of guy who lives in a nice country house and eats hot buttered toast, and he's home educating his daughter. He's that kind of, liberal type. The ethnicity of the daughter suggests that it's the daughter of him and Naomi, what's her name, from the first movie, who is conspicuously absent. In part 3, we'll hope to discover why they didn't take the military's invitation to leave the country at the end of the first film. That's a strange thing. Why is he still there? I hope we learn the reasons for that. But he is still there. And what does he represent? Well, he represents middle class, classic liberalism. An interest in education, an interest in civilization, interest in a multicultural Britain. So we can see where Garland's going with this. He's saying in order to restore Britain, in order to get it back, in order to pull it away from the lunatics and the demented and the savage, we have to re-civilize it. We have to get back to our core principles. And if we never had those principles, we need to discover them. That's the only way. Only a middle-class liberal Britain will do. Or you can have lawlessness and demagoguery and madness and disease and insanity and lots of aggressive people attacking other aggressive people. It's your choice! That, it seems to me, is the choice that we're being set up to make in the third movie, and spoilers, I think we're going to make the choice for Murphy's character, aren't we? Unless, of course, this is a terrible, terrible tragedy in which, having come this close to restoring civilization, it doesn't happen. But I think Garland will probably err toward the optimistic, upbeat ending, right? Otherwise, why have we been on this journey? Why have so many died and suffered, if not for some form of restoration? So, the kid who's playing Spike isn't getting any younger. The camera should be rolling soon, if not right now. I think it's important to maintain momentum. I'd like to see part 3 as soon as possible. I hope it will be a matter of maybe a year and a half rather than 3 years or something silly like that. We'll find out. As ever, time will tell. It always does. But 28 years later, A Bone Temple, a worthy follow-up to 28 years later. You should go and see it. If you don't see it, well, I can't help you. Goodbye!
What's Choose Life?
What?
Choose life. Simon says it sometimes. He says, choose life, Veronica.
Choose life. Choose life was a well-meaning slogan from a 1980s anti-drug campaign. And we used to add things to it. So I might say, for example, choose designer lingerie, in the vain hope of kicking some life back into a dead relationship. Choose handbags. Choose high-heeled shoes, cashmere and silk to make yourself feel what passes for happy. Choose an iPhone made in China by a woman who jumped out of a window and stick it in the pocket of your jacket fresh from a South Asian fire trap. Choose Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and 1,000 other ways to spew your bile across people you never met. Choose updating your profile. Tell the world what you had for breakfast and hope that someone somewhere cares. Choose looking up old flames, desperate to believe that you don't look as bad as they do. Choose live blogging from your first wank to your last breath. Human interaction reduced to nothing more than data. Choose 10 things you never knew about celebrities who'd had surgery. Choose screaming about abortion. Choose rape jokes, slut-shaming, revenge porn, and an endless tide of depressing misogyny. Choose 9/11 never happened, and if it did, it was the Jews. Choose a 0-hour contract and a 2-hour journey to work, and choose the same for your kids, only worse. And maybe tell yourself it's better that they never happened. And then sit back and smother the pain with an unknown dose of an unknown drug made in somebody's fucking kitchen. Choose unfulfilled promise and wishing you'd done it all differently. Choose never learning from your own mistakes. Choose watching history repeat itself. Choose the slow reconciliation towards what you can get rather than what you always hoped for. Settle for less and keep a brave face on it. Choose disappointment. And choose losing the ones you loved, and as they fall from view, a piece of you dies with them, until you can see that one day in the future, piece by piece, they will all be gone, and there'll be nothing left of you to call alive or dead. Choose your future, Veronica. Choose life. Anyway. It amused us at the time.